The next time you're pushing a cart down the supermarket aisle, I want you to just stop for a second and ask yourself a question. Do you know exactly how many invisible government forces dictated the price of the stuff sitting right there in your basket, right? It's super easy to think that prices are just kind of magically set by businesses, but behind the scenes, there is a massive, complex web of interventions at play.
Welcome to This Explainer. I'm honestly so excited to guide you through this one today because we're going to be looking at the government not as some distant authority figure, but actually as a mechanic. And just like any good mechanic, the government has a very specific toolkit designed to steer, fix, and fine-tune the free market. So let's just dive right in and explore exactly how they do it.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the tax toolkit, subsidies, direct provision of goods, price controls, buffer stocks, and finally, the power of information. Let's get to it.
All right, first up, the tax toolkit, or as I like to call it, turning the wrench on prices. Governments frequently step in using indirect taxes. Sometimes it's to discourage us from harmful habits, and other times it's simply to raise the revenue needed to run the country. Let's break down the two main types. On one hand, you've got the ad valorem tax. This is a percentage of the selling price. Think of your standard value-added tax, or GST. Because it's a percentage, the tax amount actually scales up as the product gets more expensive. Now contrast that with a specific tax. This is just a flat, fixed fee per unit, completely regardless of the item's cost. A classic example is a fuel tax. You pay a fixed amount per liter no matter what crazy things the global oil markets are doing that day. So who actually ends up paying that tax? Well, it all really comes down to elasticity. Take inelastic goods, like fuel. We absolutely need it, right? So we just keep buying it, even when prices go up. That means consumers end up bearing the brunt of the tax. But switch gears to elastic goods, like luxury items. If the price jumps, we simply stop buying. In those cases, the producers are pretty much forced to absorb the hit themselves if they want to keep our business. Let's take a look at how this actually plays out in the real world. You'll notice a big difference between the tax structures of developing nations like Indonesia and Malaysia compared to a high-income country like New Zealand. Emerging economies tend to lean heavily on indirect sales taxes. And you might be wondering, why is that? Well, tracking direct cash income from millions of informal workers is notoriously difficult. A sales tax, on the other hand, that gets collected automatically at the checkout counter. It's just way easier to manage. And to show you just how far a government will actually go to solve that tax collection problem, let's talk about India's 2016 demonetization. This was wild. Without any prior warning, the government abruptly withdrew the two highest value banknotes, the 500 and 1,000 rupee notes, literally overnight. It was a massive shock to the system, aimed directly at uncovering hidden cash, what they call black money, and forcing a rapid transition to digital payments. And the result? A huge surge in registered taxpayers. It is a prime example of a really extreme market intervention. Moving on to number 2, subsidies, boosting the market or oiling the economic gears. So, if taxes are the brakes, subsidies are the government's way of oiling the economic gears. The really crucial thing to grasp here is what a subsidy actually is. It is a direct payment from the government to a producer. By handing out this cash, the government effectively lowers that producer's manufacturing costs. And the goal here is usually pretty noble. They're trying to reduce income inequality, keep farmers in business, or just ensure that prices for everyday essentials don't skyrocket totally out of reach for the average person. Let's anchor this theory right into our daily reality. Take cooking oil, for instance, a totally basic staple food. Governments in developing nations often heavily subsidize staple foods so that low-income households can still afford to eat when global food prices spike. And then think about a city bus. Public transit is heavily subsidized all over the world. It helps people get to work, reduces terrible traffic congestion, and cuts down on pollution. It's all about making things accessible. But hey, it's not all smooth sailing. Subsidies come with some pretty steep trade-offs. The most glaring one is the massive opportunity cost. Remember, every single tax dollar spent subsidizing that bus ride is a dollar that's not being spent on building a new school or a hospital. Plus, subsidies are notoriously untargeted. A blanket subsidy on bread means billionaires get a discount on their groceries too. They can also distort the market, removing the pressure on producers to actually be efficient, and honestly, just opening the door for the misuse of government funds.
All right, on to number 3. Direct provision of goods. This is where we talk about replacing the parts entirely.
So what happens when the government decides to not just tweak the market, but to step in and replace the parts entirely? Because sometimes the free market just won't provide what society needs. Think of public goods like streetlights or national defense. Private companies can't exactly charge for them easily, so the government just has to provide them directly. But it also happens with merit goods like healthcare, provided purely for reasons of fairness. Here we see two global approaches, the UK's National Health Service and Cuba's medical system. Both of these systems bypass the free market completely to provide healthcare directly to citizens, largely free at the point of use, with the goal of aggressively reducing inequality. And this brings us right to one of the great economic debates of our time. On one side, you have this very noble goal of absolute equity, the core belief that essential services should never, ever depend on your bank account. But on the flip side, critics are quick to point out the harsh economic realities. When something is entirely free, people tend to overuse it. That leads to wasted resources, super long wait times, and massive inefficiencies, mostly because there is zero competition driving any sort of improvement. It is a really delicate balancing act.
Next up is number 4, price controls, setting limits, and basically installing speed governors on the economy.
If the previous tools were about adding oil or replacing parts, this is about throwing a speed governor on the whole engine. We've got two totally opposite controls here. First, maximum prices, or price ceilings. These are legally enforced limits set below the natural market price. The idea is to protect a struggling consumer from being completely priced out of essentials, like rent or basic food. Then, on the other hand, you have minimum prices, or price floors. These are set above the natural market price to protect vulnerable suppliers. Think of minimum wage laws for workers or guaranteed minimum crop prices to keep farmers from going bankrupt.
To see how a maximum price actually operates in reality, just look at a New York City taxi. The city imposes a maximum fare for trips going from major airports into Manhattan. Now, if you are a tourist, this is fantastic, right? It keeps your ride super affordable. But put yourself in the driver's shoes for a second. During miserable rush hour traffic, that fixed fare totally disincentivizes you from even making the trip because you literally can't charge a premium for all that lost time.
And honestly, that NYC taxi example perfectly highlights the painful side effects of price ceilings. Because the price is kept artificially low, demand skyrockets while supply just plummets. That causes severe product shortages. Just imagine waiting in endless lines for basic goods, or having the government actually step in to ration how much you're allowed to buy. And inevitably, when the legal market dries up, illegal black markets rise up to fill the void, usually at absolutely exorbitant prices.
Moving right along to number 5, buffer stocks. These are the economy's shock absorbers.
Think of buffer stocks as heavy-duty shock absorbers. They're a brilliant hybrid mechanism mostly used in agriculture, where wild weather can cause dangerously volatile prices. Let's just walk through this step by step. Step 1, a bumper crop causes market prices to absolutely crash. Step 2, to save the farmers, the government steps in as a buyer of last resort. They purchase the excess and put it into storage, so there's your price floor. Step 3, a drought hits the next year, and prices threaten to spike. Step 4, to save the consumers, the government releases that stored crop back into the market, which acts as a price ceiling. It beautifully smooths out the market. Though I should mention it does come at a massive, massive cost in warehousing and storage.
And finally, number 6, the power of information, the dashboard warning lights. Every good machine has dashboard warning lights, and the economy is really no different. Sometimes, markets fail simply because of what we call information failure. Consumers make bad choices just because they're essentially driving blind. So instead of banning a product outright, the government intervenes by just providing the facts. We're talking about graphic health warnings on cigarette packets, public vaccination campaigns, or even just mandating really clear nutrition and allergy labels on our food. By lighting up the dashboard with this data, the government empowers us to make better, healthier choices completely on our own. So we've explored the taxes, the subsidies, the price controls, and the warning lights. Now I want to leave you with this final, kind of provocative question to consider the next time you're evaluating an economic policy. Based on all the trade-offs we've looked at today, should the government intervene more to protect consumers, or should it just step back, put the tools away, and let the free market decide? Thanks so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.